So my name is Dianne Gibbs and I'm 32 years old. I live in California. And I would say the very first time I really noticed, I was maybe about like 6 or 7 years old, but I never said anything because I didn't think that it was out of the ordinary. And then fast forward a couple years, like my parents were like, "Oh, your hands are sweaty." And then I started to kind of like, "Oh, you're right. Like, is this not normal?" So then I started to be like more self-conscious. And actually I saw in Bree's video, that she had said like she wore like long sleeves and, dark clothing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we didn't know each other then. And, the things that you do when you do have hyperhidrosis that you just like have to work around,
Mhm.
in order for you to not, to make it less noticeable. So, fast forward a few years, we went to the doctor. They kind of told us what it was, but they didn't really know much of a solution. Um, and then in 2015, I went to my primary care doctor and I'm like, I'm just done with it. This is, I'm so over it. I, at that point, was 24 years old and was like, I can't live like this anymore. So I tried a couple different medications or the creams. I forgot the name, Certain Dry. I used that where I had to basically at night wrap my like put that on my hands, put, like plastic over it and then a sock over it and sleep in that, which was so uncomfortable. And it just made my hands like just feel super weird. And it didn't actually help the sweating. So then I was on a medication, like an oral medication, that didn't help. It basically just dried everything else out. And I'm like, this is not, my mouth was dry constantly. And I'm like, this isn't worth it. So I stopped and I basically at that point just gave up and was like, I am never going to have not sweaty hands. So I just went on about my life. My husband, thankfully, he never bothered him. So I didn't have to, deal with it in terms of that. But like my job, I dealt with paperwork and it was, handshaking. And it was just so many different things that I avoided or that I like was basically like a turtle in a shell where I just, if I didn't have to do it, I wouldn't do it. Or if I could find ways around it, then I would find a way so that people wouldn't know. But, you know, it gets hard and it's exhausting. You're just like, okay, what am I going to do next so that nobody notices? What's the next thing I have to adjust in life? Um, so when I found your video, that's how I um, first learned about the center, which was insane. The feeling, the goosebumps that I had when I was like, oh my gosh, her hands are, sweaty. And this was, after your surgery, but you were showing how sweaty your hands were. And I'm like, this is it. This is, this could be the big break. But then again, you retract and you're like, okay, this has to be too good to be true.
Mhm.
Like, does it actually work? I've tried a couple other things and I even was offered the whole Botox thing, but I was too scared to go through with it. So I'm like, okay, is this going to be a super invasive surgery? I had at that point I had only had one surgery before, and it was an emergency like appendix removal surgery. So I was kind of scared because that one was pretty painful, and I didn't want to go through anything like that again. And then I want to say I reached out to you via their Instagram, and you replied back to me, and we scheduled a phone call, and it was probably, and I remember sitting through that and just the nerves and everything on top of it. My hands and my feet were
Oh
just
my gosh,
dripping.
dripping.
I was like trying to write notes as I'm, and more, you're talking about your hands. So it
Mhm.
makes it even worse. It's already, you're already sweating. And at this point, it's just like dripping down my
So
arm.
miserable.
And you told me that you had that same, thing happen, and that at that point when we were talking, your hands were completely dry. And I'm like, Bree, I like you already just from talking to you, but I don't know how true this is.
Right.
And I started doing my research. I started looking at the center's Instagram page, their website, like how legit is this? And I was very lucky that I'm only 2.5 hours away,
Right.
because a lot of people that make a journey, I can't even imagine how much more nerve-wracking that is
Right.
to get
It's a
on
whole
a
other
plane.
element to
Yes.
having surgery and like everything else. It's already kind of chaotic and like a whirlwind of emotions, and then having to travel. It's like, what on earth is happening? So yeah, that is awesome that you were so close.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, I figured, even though after speaking with you and Dr. Basseri, I was like, okay, this is an actual thing. Like, you still have that little doubt in your mind where you're just like, so I figured if I drive there and I just don't get a good feeling, and something throws me off then I can always back out. It's only 2.5 hours away. But I'm so glad that I went through with it. It's been such a life-changing experience for me. Um, I can't even begin. I feel like there's no limit to what I can do. Before, it was like, okay, I can't do this because I'm going to be, touching people's hands or touching paperwork. And what if I mess it up? Like, now I work for my son's school, and I'm a kindergarten aide. And so what I do now is helping the kids with their scissors, and I can hold their hands and help them, maneuver the scissors and make copies and pass things out, and not feel like I'm ruining the paper, or like, the kids are going to say something like, your hands are sweaty, because I had that personal experience with my own children, where I would grab their socks and I would go put them on, and they would say like, oh, mom, the socks are wet. Why are the socks wet? I don't want wet socks on my feet. And it's like, they didn't know any better. But that was something that I was like, something as simple as putting your children's socks on is a challenge when you have sweaty hands. I never felt comfortable crossing the street with holding their hand, because I'm like, they can slip out of my hand at any moment. So it was always my husband, like, hey, can you hold their hand while we cross the street? Because I don't want to lose their grip. Um,
Right.
and so things like safety, things like that, or, driving was a big thing. I would constantly adjust the vents to hold the steering wheel, so that the vents were constantly just blowing cold air on my hands, so that my hands would not get so slippery that I would lose grip of the steering wheel.
Yeah, or like, would you, before you go in somewhere, like say you were like about to go into an event for like your kid's school, or you're about to go somewhere where you were like, oh, I may be shaking somebody's hands, would you sit in front of like the vents in your car?
Yes.
I would literally do that. Like if I had an interview or anything, I would just be like, please, like cold air all the way up, and I'm like, please, Lord, let me get in here and just shake their hand. And then
Exactly, like that initial thing, yes. And
oh,
it's so crazy, the things that you do. Um, I would get like paper towels, and I would keep those in my car, because I was constantly like wiping my hands if I was going to meet someone. But interviews were so nerve-wracking for me. I feel like before having kids, I missed so many opportunities of going in for an interview, because I'm like, I just can't sit through that interview. And a
right.
lot of the places, they have this dark, shiny table,
Mhm.
and then if you put your hands, you can just see the sweat everywhere. And I'm like, no, I can't. In meetings, I'm constantly like, I would be constantly putting my hands on my lap, making sure I wear dark clothing, so that if I wipe, you don't have just this like streak of sweat down a light colored clothing. It was just, you know, and um, it just blows my mind that we've all done the same things without even knowing each other, or knowing that, so many other people suffer from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of touches on what I wanted to, you said something earlier that I wanted to talk more on. And it was that you noticed that your hands are sweaty, But then when your parents brought it up, they're like, oh, your hands are sweaty. And you're like, oh, that's not normal because you don't really know. And like for me, it was kind of like, it's kind of blurry looking back, honestly, like
It
until I
is.
got older and I was like, I don't know if it's getting worse or if I'm just aware of it and it's always been this bad. But now I'm, now I'm going through high school and college and I am fully aware that my hands are extremely sweaty and that nobody else's are, or if it was actually getting worse or a mix of both. But once you notice and once you're at that age where you're like, my hands are dripping, every single day is exhausting. And it's
It
just
is.
constantly, who's going to see my hands? What am I going to do to hide my hands? What am I going to wear to do? Like, it's exhausting. And you don't even really realize it until after surgery, I would say, because that's just all you know. So you're like, you just do it. Like, you do those little things. You don't think, like, oh, I need to put my hands in front of the vent. Like, you might think that, but it's like a subconscious thought, you know?
Yes. It's just like part of your everyday life, things that
Right.
you're doing, things that you're adjusting. And another thing on high school, I feel like in high school, it's already hard enough to like, okay, what are you going to wear? I feel like that's so important in high school. Now looking back, you're just like, oh, it doesn't really matter. But back then, and then on top of it, having hyperhidrosis, you can't wear a lot of the stuff that others are wearing because you have to stick to darker colors. You have to stick to things that are not going to show the sweat. And, although I did have good high school years, I would say it was a million times harder because of the things that I had to do for people not to notice. I would avoid, going with my friends to the nail salon, or because if someone would say something, then it's like, then I have to sit there and explain the story. And to a lot of people, it's gross.
Yeah. Or they just don't get it. They're like you can explain it and the best way you know how, but nobody truly gets it unless they have hyperhidrosis. And I've even had like just very few people that don't have it that actually sit there and listen. It's more interesting now because we've had the surgery and it's like this whole story. But when you're living it, it's like you have very few people that are actually like, oh my gosh, that's insane. I don't have that, but I get you. Like
And
very
that's another thing with my sister. You met my sister, and
yes.
she's the one that I went with to get my surgery. And we were sitting down the night before having dinner with you and Kayla, and we were all sharing the things that we did. And although my sister knew that I suffered from this, she never realized how many things we adjust, how many things we avoid, how many things are just off the table because our hands do sweat. And she turned to me and she's like, I'm so sorry. And that just kind of made me feel so good because I'm like, okay, I was never the person to like sit there and complain. It is what it is. I'm going to live with it. It's something that I just adjust, my life for. But, even my sister didn't know the extent of it. So I can't expect others to know that. But it does get exhausting to educate people when you're living through it. Because
Absolutely.
you're just like, now you're judging me. Now you're judging me. Versus now, I feel like I almost feel like it's my duty because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have seen it on Instagram. And like I said, I wasn't searching for it
Right.
because at that point I had given up. So seeing your video because you were sharing, now I feel like I have the obligation also of sharing my story so that hopefully it gets to another person and, people aren't waiting until they're 32 or 40 or, to get the surgery. They don't have to go through their wedding day or, having babies. Like I breastfed and holding my babies was just like would drench their clothes. Just so many things that, I went through because I didn't know about the surgery when I was younger.
Right, absolutely. Um, and so you had tried a ton of treatments leading up to it, and you kind of said that you gave up too. And I think I tell patients all the time on the phone, I feel like we all sort of hit that point where we're like, I'm done. I'm just gonna have to live with this. And I know for me, it was after I had tried the iontophoresis machine. And I didn't even know about Botox. I didn't know about surgery. I was about 14 years old when I tried that. And I was like, didn't work, it's painful, I'm done. Like there's nothing for me. And I lived like multiple years of my life after that, never even mentioning the fact that I had sweaty hands, hyperhidrosis, anything, until I hit a breaking point one day. And I literally just out of frustration typed in hyperhidrosis surgery into Google, like not expecting anything. And Dr. Basseri popped up. And it's like, this is too good to be true. What is this? You like go through a whole rabbit hole with that. But it is, it's still unbelievable to me that like we're even having a Zoom call about this because we had,
No.
it's like, what is this world? If you would have told 14-year-old me who was sitting there with her hands on this machine, shocking my hands, that I would one day be in this community of other people who have hyperhidrosis, I'd be like, you're lying. There's nobody else that has it like me.
I know, like you just give, like there was no hope. Like you just felt like so defeated. And to know that, if you would have known, like that
Right.
that surgery would have been done at your age.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it doesn't help when we have patients all the time that are like, well, I went to my dermatologist, I went to my pediatrician, and they don't know. So, like, how defeated do you feel as a child most of the time, or a teenager going into a dermatologist, a medical professional, and they're like, I've never seen anything like this before. This is wild. I don't know, maybe try these pills. And it's like every single patient tells me the same story, and it's along those lines. And it breaks my heart that they just don't know.
Almost like you're an experiment, and
Yeah.
and then that makes you feel more alone because you're like, oh, if he's never seen it, then not a lot of people have it. And you just feel like, okay, I just need to hide it because no one's going to understand me. No one's going to know what it is.
Yeah, it's so sad really because you think like medical professionals they should know. And so then when they don't even know what your condition is, I've talked thankfully my pediatrician did know that it was called hyperhidrosis, so I at least had that information. But I've talked to so many patients where they didn't know that it was called hyperhidrosis until they found our page. And that just blows my mind. Like people that are, grown adults now that are like, I literally had no idea that this was called hyperhidrosis. And so the fact that it's not even being taught, at least to the extent that it should be in school for medical professionals, it just
Just
blows.
to mention something that it
Yeah,
it really blows my mind. And I think that that's where we come in. And um, when those medical professionals don't know, if
mhm,
somebody finds us, on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, wherever it may be, if we can reach those people so that they know what it is, and that they're not alone and that there's a solution for it, those are the biggest three things that I feel like why I'm doing this.
absolutely. And for anybody that's watching or listening to this right now, Dianne is one of our patient educators, meaning you can have a call with her. So it's super awesome. We have myself, Dianne, and Alberto, and then you can also have a free call with Dr. Basseri. So those are like such great resources to utilize all free. So it's like a no-brainer to, especially if you're just looking into surgery, message us on Instagram, say, I would love to be connected with your patient educators and Dr. Basseri. At no cost, we can connect you with everyone. And it's nice, I think, to have 3 different patient educators. We all had our surgery at different times. Alberto had his years before I even had mine. And then you're just at a year. I'm at a little over 2 years. So it's great to like be able to talk to everyone. We're all different ages, different ethnicities, like everything. So it's so cool to be able to hear how compensatory sweating was for everyone, how recovery was for everyone, because my recovery may be different than yours. And that kind of leads me into that whole aspect. I would love for you to talk about your surgery experience. You can kind of talk about pre op day and then surgery day and recovery.
Okay. So, like I said before, I was lucky enough that I only lived 2.5 hours away from the center. And so we scheduled my surgery, which by the way, and I had my first initial contact with Bree in April of 2022. And it was a back and forth battle with my insurance. And so I did not get approved for my insurance until the end of August. And at that point, I was in communication with the center, and they said, you know, we can schedule you out less than a month, because my insurance required within 30 days of approval, or yeah, 30 days after approval, I had to have my surgery. So the center, you know, scheduled me in. They understood, they knew that it needed to be done sooner than later. So my surgery day was September 9th of 2022. And the day before, I drove in, I had my consultation. They went over everything. I had a consultation also with Dr. Basseri. I was able to ask him any questions that I had. And this is another thing I described to other patients that I've talked to, is Dr. Basseri went in and he's like, you know, let me see your hands. And he grabs my hands. And my first initial thing is like shock, because I don't let people touch my hands very often at that point. And he's just like touching and like looking at it, asking me questions like normal. He makes you feel so comfortable. He understands that, you know, your hand sweating is out of your control. And so we went over that. Then I went to the pre-op, the surgery center right next door, and they went over, you know, things of what to wear, all this stuff. So I went in the next day for my surgery, and I want to say my surgery was about 9 a.m. And if I remember correctly, I was out of surgery before 10 a.m.
Yeah.
And then I came out of surgery, and straight out of surgery, my hands were warm and dry and exactly how you guys had described it. And it was unbelievable. Like, I couldn't believe that straight out of surgery, my hands just stopped sweating. And I had never, there were times when my hands weren't completely sweaty pre-surgery, but they did not feel like they felt after surgery. Like, you know that they're dry.
There's a difference. Yeah. And I feel like that's for a couple of reasons. For me personally, I feel like maybe my hands were never actually dry. Like, they were dry to me because it wasn't dripping. It was still like kind of clammy. Or
Yeah.
if they were dry, I would be like, oh my gosh, my hands are dry right now, and then sweat.
Yep, exactly.
Like, why did I think about it? They were dry. So after
Yes.
surgery, it's this feeling of like, oh my gosh, it's over. Like, I'm literally sitting here thinking about my hands and nothing.
Yes, like you get that like phantom feeling that they're gonna sweat and they don't. And it's almost like you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and it doesn't come. And, you know, over a year later, in more than 2 years for you, no hand sweat, which, like I said, is completely, completely life-changing. I can do so many things now. And then the lotion test.
Oh my gosh, my favorite.
Like, as soon as that lotion hit my hand, I knew it was different. I knew it felt different. Like, it was just this moment of my hands are actually absorbing the lotion like they're supposed to. And I never understood when I would go to other people's houses and they had, you know, a thing of soap, hand soap, and then the thing of lotion. Because, you know, before surgery, I'm not about to put lotion on my hands after washing them. That is like the biggest no. So now I do that in my own home.
Yep, same.
Now I realize that why people have lotion next to their hand soap.
Right. And also, for anybody listening, just because we get this question sometimes where people ask, are your hands overly dry? They are not like dry, tacky. Like, I have lotion next to my soap now because I can put lotion on. And I have like a fun little like holiday scent, and I'm like, this is so fun to be.
You can enjoy it, and it doesn't feel like
it just absorbs so nicely, but they're not like cracky, dry. Like, they're just soft, normal.
Exactly.
Would
you don't sound like very like cardboard, or no, not like that at all. Because that was one of my worries too.
Mhm.
I'm like, am I gonna get like calluses because my hands are so dry and just like from touching stuff? But no, they just feel like normal hands, which is so weird to say now.
Yes.
But a whole year later, they just feel like any other person who doesn't have hyperhidrosis.
Right. And it's still amazes me if I think about it, which I do often.
Yes.
If you could talk a little bit about recovery, and then we can get into compensatory sweating specifically. But for right now, like recovery right after surgery. So you wake up, you feel your hands are dry, and then what?
And so I just feel a little bit of heaviness in my chest area. Nothing too bad. And like I said, I had a appendix removed a year before. And for those of you who have had appendix surgery, um, that was brutal compared to this. The ETS surgery was, I would say, a breeze compared to when I got my appendix taken out. I was in the car and driving home the same day, just a few hours later. My sister and I just stopped for Starbucks, and then we drove back home. And I would say I just took it easy that day and the next day. But honestly, I would, if I were to rate the pain, it would be about maybe the most it got a 4 or 5 at the most. And then it just subsided from there. 10 days after surgery, maybe 8 days after surgery, I want to say 8 days after surgery, I went to a concert and I was dancing. And because I'm a big dancer, I love to dance, I love music. So I was dancing and I was able to, at the time, my feet were not sweating that much.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was able to wear cute sandals, and I didn't have to wear a shirt that, didn't show sweat. I was able to wear what I wanted, and I didn't have very much pain by day 8. I would say maybe a 1 or 2, and it was just the incisions because obviously they open you up. So those are still healing, but I
Right.
wouldn't say that the pain was more than a 1 or 2 at day 8.
Yeah. And just to touch on that a little more, the incisions are so tiny. So
Yes.
very, and I always just like to clarify for anybody that goes and does research, which do all your research that you want to do. Just keep in mind as you're doing that, surgery is very different now than it used to be. However, it's all called ETS. I like to clarify that on like any video that I do for any, because you never know, this could be the first video somebody's watching, where they're like, whoa, I have this. I've never seen a video about this. So hello, if it's your first video ever. But yeah, ETS is very different than it used to be. It used to be a very invasive surgery, like areas of incision, they would collapse the lungs. Everything about it was different than
And
how it
I
is.
don't think I would have got it done if
I don't
that
think
was
it would have either.
the procedure that we had to go through.
And so how I feel very fortunate that we live in this day and age where there is a safe and minimally invasive way. So yeah, so as Diane was saying, incisions kind of bother you for a little bit. Just like for me, it was more itchy. I was like, I want to touch them, but I can't touch them. But they're like so tiny. So
I would
again,
say a nickel size, like length.
so tiny.
Yeah, and they're barely even noticeable. I noticed them the other day when I was wearing a dress that was like lower
Yeah.
cut like this. But other than that, I don't ever notice them. No one ever points them out.
Nobody would know unless you showed them. And during that recovery period, anytime my chest was bothering me or the incisions were bothering me, I would literally look at my hands and I was like, I can't complain right now.
It's worth it. It's so worth it. Exactly. And then also another thing is that Dr. Basseri checked in with me via text, via phone calls. How are you doing? How are you feeling? What place does that? I don't know that my dad has had several surgeries. No one's called him. They gave him an appointment to like follow up,
Mhm.
but no one's calling him, on a daily basis to check in. No one's texting him like, "Hey, how are you doing? Do you have any concerns? Do you this?" And he was just from the get-go. I'm like, he actually cares. And that's another reason why I feel like working for the center is such a big thing. If I didn't think or know that he's such a good person and that he actually cares about his patients, I don't know that I would be so willing to, say that I work for the center and participate in them if I didn't have a great experience.
Absolutely. It makes such a huge difference as a patient. And then when I talk to patients now and I, tell them like, yes, I do work for the center, but I would not be working there if I did not truly like love and like have so much passion for everything they do. Everyone from Dr. Basseri to the nurses to the office staff, like my whole experience as a patient was exceptional. And so I knew like being a part of that team, it was only gonna be like even more of that, like just so awesome and
Yeah.
being able to help people. And that's truly like I've never been around an office setting where everyone there, most people at the office, all of them, aka besides the patient educators, don't have hyperhidrosis that I know of.
And
So
they
it's like
genuinely
they care.
care
They
and
care.
they want you to, you know, be on the other side of it
Exactly.
and
They
not have
care
to go
so
through that.
much. It's like you would think that all of them lived through having hyperhidrosis because they genuinely care. And you can tell it is like a very genuine, they want to help every single patient. They treat every single patient as an individual. It's not like even on pre-op day, surgery day, you don't feel rushed going through. I've had people ask me that before. You do not feel rushed. It's like they really take their time with you. They answer every single question. They make sure they cover every single topic and base that they can. So it's
And
I
they
could go
encourage, they
on and
say, send me your questions.
on.
Um,
Right.
anything you can think of, just send it, to either Sabrina or you or whoever you spoke to. And they just make it such an environment where you feel comfortable asking these questions, where you don't feel like, oh, you have a time limit. These are the only questions you can ask, and so on and so forth. So I feel like it completely, it's just like a icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm.
On top of you having this life-changing surgery, you had this experience prior to that where everyone treated you like a, quote unquote normal person,
Yeah.
and everyone's just trying to help you.
Yeah.
And I did want to point out, so this journey has now also, I talk about it way more. And I found out I have a coworker whose daughter
Mm.
hyperhidrosis, and she is 12 years old. And I spoke to her, and the light that you see in her eyes, to know that someone else has it, which I wish I had that at 12 years old. So it makes me so happy that I'm able to show someone that, they're not alone, that
Right.
there is a solution for this. And that another reason why I love what I do and I agreed to, come on as a patient educator, is because it now I can talk about it freely,
Right.
and I am able to show others, especially younger. That just makes me so happy to have a younger person not have to live till they're 32 years old without this surgery.
Absolutely. And even if surgery isn't feasible for them right now, which Dr. Basseri does start doing the surgery at 12 years old, and I always think about how my life would be so different if I had
Yes.
this at 12 years old. But besides that, I'm very grateful to have had it when I did. It's still just so amazing to be a part of the community. And if you're a parent watching this who your child has hyperhidrosis, show them these videos. Our videos are such a great resource for your kid to know, like, okay, I'm not weird. I'm not like the only person in the world that has these sweaty hands. And that's one thing looking back that I wish I could have changed is just being more aware of it and knowing like it's fine that my hands are sweaty. Like, yes, it bothers me, but if it bothers somebody else that my hands are sweaty, I don't need to be around them anyways. Like, they're not a good person if they care that my hands are
Exactly. But I
sweating.
feel like when you're a kid, you take it so personal and you're like, they don't want to be my friend because,
Yeah,
and then it just
I would
puts you in
hide
a
it
shell.
to the max. Like it is exhausting. Like we said, there's really no better word to explain it than it's very exhausting and it can be very isolating. Even if you are an outgoing, bubbly person, you can only be so outgoing and so bubbly when your hands are dripping sweat. There's always a part of you that's like, somebody's
I
gonna see.
feel like you can't fully be confident
Absolutely.
because someone's going to see through it. Someone's going to see that you have sweaty hands and it's always in the back of your mind. So it's
Right.
like you never let it rest because your life basically revolves around that.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads me into the question that I had for you, which is relationships, friendships, even just like being a mom. How has that changed since having the surgery?
So I've never been a super touchy-feely person. N- with my kids, I was a little bit more, but as they got older, they're like, "Mom, your hands are sweaty." My kids are 6 and 3, but my 6-year-old started to notice it way more. And I'm like, "Oh, I just want to hug you. I just want to touch your face. And now it's like every second of every day, if I can do that, then I can, totally just hug them and touch their face. And now doing their hair, I'm like touching their face and putting their socks on and holding their hands across the street, and just so many different things that I can do now that I couldn't before. Like I mentioned, also my husband never cared about it. He just was never judgmental. He would hold my hand still, which I'm so lucky and feel so blessed that has just been so understanding. Because like you mentioned before, dating, that was such a hard thing. I didn't date a lot growing up. I, you know, just put that like, okay, they're gonna judge me, they're gonna say something. And I had, guys say, like, what's going on with your hands? And I'm like, oh. And then it would just end there. I'm like, okay, never mind. I don't want to talk about it. I'm
Right.
not going on another date. Um, but my husband, I never had to worry about that. So that's been awesome. My friends, growing up, they were always very like, oh, like hugs and stuff. And I just was not that person. And now I'm like, oh, let me hug you. Like I haven't seen you in a long time. It just has changed the way that I embrace people, because now I'm not afraid to, because now I'm not going to wet their clothes, or, even, if we go to a pool party and then they only have like a bathing suit and you're just like, oh, I don't want to touch you. I'm not in the pool yet. I don't know what,
Right.
so it has definitely changed so many aspects of my life.
Oh, I love that so much. I remember because I was so lucky to have been there for your surgery. I remember we FaceTimed your family afterwards, and I don't know if you remember, you may,
Yes,
where
I do.
okay, and we were like talking to your little boys, and I remember you telling them like, "Mom, you can put your socks on now." And that one, like, I was standing there like holding your phone, I'm like, "Oh my gosh."
I know that was like one of my moments where
Yeah,
something so little that others,
don't think
wouldn't. Yeah, something as simple. And every morning I put their socks on, and I'm not afraid to do that anymore, because
yeah, and it's just such a little thing and like a little tiny part of motherhood, but it's one of those little things where you're like, I can do it now. Do you remember the first time after surgery when you like put their little socks on?
oh my gosh, yes, it was like such a monumental moment. Like it's something I was longing to do, because before they would be like, I don't like it. So I'd be like, okay, you guys, you either have to figure it out or I have to get dad to do it. If dad wasn't available, like I can't. I would try to go wash my hands really quick, get their socks on, dry it, get their socks on. And, but yes, it's something that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. And, um, I would not trade it for the world, even for, the compensatory sweating.
Yes, and let's get into that. So, for anybody watching, if this is your first video and you're not familiar, compensatory sweating is sweating in other areas after the surgery. For majority of Dr. Basseri's patients, that is primarily the back of the stomach. It can be in other areas. It's a little bit different person to person. So, Diane, if you would like to share your experience with that.
Yes. So, I do have the compensatory sweating. It is on my back. and it is only when it's really hot outside. Where I live, usually in the summer it gets about 115 degrees. So if I were to be standing outside in that weather, yes, my back would sweat. Now if it's in like 80s, my back won't sweat just from standing there. If I'm working out, my back will sweat, which I mean, I like that way better than
Mm-hmm.
my hands sweating. I feel like that it doesn't prevent me from doing anything.
Right.
You know, I can still be at work if I'm like running around and it's really warm outside and I'm going from in and out of the classroom. Yes, I can start my back to, I can start to feel my back sweating, but no one else notices. And it's not to the point where it's like dripping sweat like my hands would. So is not anything that I can't live with. And everybody else sweats, whether it's their forehead or their back or, when they're working out, things like that. I hardly sweat for my face,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't make my face sweat. I still don't sweat for my face. So like I said, I would much rather live with that. It did take some adjusting, but I'm completely used to it, and I would not trade the surgery for the world.
Absolutely. And I think a good thing to point out with the compensatory sweating that you did mention, it's not like you're just sitting here or like day to day life, going through day to day life, how your hands would sweat doing nothing. It's not like your back is doing that now, where, you're just walking through the grocery store and your back is sweating. It's not like that. With the hands before surgery, you could be sitting in an air conditioned room doing nothing and they could be dripping sweat. They have a mind of their own. The back, it's like you have to have that reason. And I absolutely agree with you. It does take a little bit of getting used to. And I always tell this story on the phone with patients. I feel like those first couple of months for me, it was summer, it was hot outside, and I would be on a walk with my mom or with my friends. And every single walk, probably for the first 2 months, I was like, are you guys sweating? Is your back sweating? And they were like, Bree, it's 98 degrees outside and muggy. We
Yes,
are
we're
all
sweating.
sweating.
Yes.
And so, but it honestly took me those 2 months really of talking with my family and my friends and asking them if they were sweating to be like, okay, this is normal. And
Yes.
okay, but you don't really know what normal is.
Yes.
So it's
And then I
looking
also tell the story of when I went to hot yoga with my niece.
at,
And this was after surgery. And we're working out, doing the hot yoga, and I'm looking around and you have people just like dripping sweat. And I feel like if I had done this before surgery, all I would have been focused on was, oh my gosh, my hands are sweating, my hands are slipping. But then I look around and like people's arms are sweating, people's backs are sweating, people's faces are sweating. And I'm like, I would have just been so focused on my sweating that I would have noticed that it's completely normal for you to sweat that much, especially when you're doing hot yoga.
absolutely. That's funny that you bring hot yoga up because that was one thing I'm like, oh my gosh, like put me in one of my worst nightmares. It was either going on a date with somebody or doing hot yoga. And I know like because yeah, it is normal to sweat in all these other areas, but if your hands are sweating and like the class just started, it's like you really feel like everybody's looking at you, even though everybody may not even care. You feel like they are, and at the end of the day, like sweating that much from your palms is not normal. Like in
Exactly.
whatever way you want to put it, I lived through it. You lived through it. It's not normal.
Exactly, or your feet. So that's another thing for me.
Yeah,
Dr. Basseri said that there was a 20% chance. I believe that's what
yeah,
that
about 15 to 20%.
to 20% chance of your feet resolving after surgery. Now, my feet did resolve at the beginning, but he also did state that it might not stay that way. And I would say my feet have improved about 70%. So when it's really, really hot outside, um, or when I'm wearing sandals every once in a while, but nothing compared to before.
Right.
I'm able to buy cute shoes now because I feel like tennis shoes I would ruin because even with socks on, like my feet were sweaty. Sandals I ruined because you're like slipping and sliding and then they get dirty and then it ruins them. So it's like I'm finally able to enjoy and buy cute shoes. Um, so I'm so happy about that. And I just hope that everybody else has the same experience, even if your feet don't get, resolved 100%, that you're able to experience some relief when it comes to your feet if you do not do the ELS surgery.
Right, and it's so interesting being able to speak with all of you guys who have already had the surgery and hearing whose feet improved and who, may not have improved as much. And even for anybody listening, if you go back and watch our recent interviews that are going to be, they're all on YouTube. If you post or if you watch any of those, you will be able to see kind of like whose feet improved, who didn't, because we talk about that in every video. So it's really cool. I know there was one, she was like, my feet didn't improve. Kayla's feet improved quite a bit. My feet improved. I always say about 80%. They sweat when they get hot, but it's very manageable. Like before, I would put socks on to make them stop sweating. Now, if my feet are sweating, it's probably because I have socks on and they're hot. And I'll like
Yes.
take my socks off and, my feet cool down. I'm like, wow, Uno reverse. Like, that's crazy.
So crazy.
It is so interesting. And it's great knowing too, like there is that ELS procedure. If your feet don't improve, your feet are still sweating, they still bother you, you can go back and get that.
Yes. Any other? Sorry.
Very good. And then we really covered pretty much everything. Um, one more question. Do you have any triggers that make your hands sweat now? Like I would say maybe get clammy, like not necessarily sweat, but if you're hot or nervous or something, do your hands ever get clammy?
It's very rare. I would say maybe like once or twice a month.
Yeah.
And that's usually when at the school I work at, they crank the heater because they get really cold in the office. And when I go in there, everybody thinks it's hot. So I would say that's the only time when it's like I go from the cold to like just sudden hot like that. Then they get a little bit clammy, but they resolve. Like it doesn't last very long. Um, so I would say my hands are dry 99% of the time.
Yep, I 100% agree with that. The only time I've really noticed mine get a little bit clammy is in the summer if I'm on a run, especially if I'm like holding my phone or something when I'm running.
Oh,
They'll get a little bit clammy, but it's like everybody's hands get clammy. So I can take that any day. And I kind of look back now on anybody where I said, oh, my hands are sweaty. And they say, mine too. And I'm like, yeah, right. That's what I envisioned.
now we're those people that, now I'm like, oh, my hands are sweaty. I'm like, they're not, they're
They're
not
like the
sweaty.
slightest bit clammy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we covered quite a bit. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. If you have any message or word of advice, wisdom, anything to leave with somebody who may be watching this and their hands are still sweating right now, what would you say to them?
I would say I understand that having surgery is so nerve-wracking. And, as a mom of two boys, I'm like, oh, getting put under and things like that was a very scary thing for me to do. Or what if it doesn't work? What if I'm doing this? We've all had those situations. I can assure you that you will have such a great experience with Dr. Basseri and his office and all the staff, like Bree said, and you will not regret it. So I hope that this brings awareness that you're not alone. And I would love to speak with you, even if you decide, you don't want the surgery. Surgery is not for you. I would love to speak with you just to show you that others are out there and that there is a solution if one day you decide that it's the road that you want to take.
Absolutely. And again, for anybody watching, if you want to be in contact with Dianne, myself, both of us, Alberto, you can DM us on Instagram. It's just the Center for Hyperhidrosis. This video will be on YouTube. If it's easier for you to just leave a comment saying that you want to talk with Dianne, just comment that and we will make sure we get in contact with you. But thank you so much, Dianne.
Thank you.